as much as any particular discipline that we work with in financial planning, the subject of long-term care is misunderstood, and there's so much misinformation that's out there that today we want to talk about several myths that surround long-term care and really how the financial planning process itself can be an antidote to that.
So if you missed our previous video about long-term care, the overview of needs and costs, you can go back and watch that. But today we're going to dive into some myths. So Spencer, take us away. What's that first myth of long-term care?
Well, this is one that we hear from both clients and then also from their sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, heirs. We hear this a lot, which is, if I need long-term care, it will cost me everything that I have. And the myth really goes something like this. If I check into a facility, all of my accounts go over and they're in the stewardship, or I have to pay the facility with everything that I own, whether it's my IRA or other types of accounts. And that's just not the case. So as we dive in, first, long-term care is paid out in the same way that you would pay out medical bills typically, or you would pay out your grocery bills. You are invoiced, for costs for services, and then you pay those out of your cash flow, typically out of your bank, checking, savings account, and go from there. So that's the first big one that we'll dive into here just a little bit more.
Yeah. And so the costs that we are going to use for this come from a company called Genworth, and they did a little study of what are the costs of long-term care. So we're going to use the cost for Knoxville, Tennessee, where we live, but you can get on the website. We'll post the link in the description in the video to where you can see what the costs for your area are. However, again, today we're just using costs for Knoxville, Tennessee. We recognize these costs vary state by state, city by city. So check out what your costs are, but here's just a couple of examples. We're going to start off with a man named Al. Al receives about $36,000 a year in Social Security. He owns his home outright, which is valued at $400,000, and he's got about $1.5 million in retirement savings. Al is afraid, though, that all of his assets are going to get liquidated if he has to go into long-term care. The state is going to take his house. It's all going to go. Well, let's pull the curtain back a little bit, and let's see what actually would happen here. So if Al recently had to enter a nursing home, he doesn't anticipate being able to return back to his primary home. Again, if you watch our video from last week, very few cases in this situation where men enter a nursing home have to pay for care for more than 2 years. So let's take that as the baseline, but then let's play it out even further. What if it is 10 years, 15 years? Is Al going to be okay? So again, he's got $36,000 of Social Security. Where we live, he wants a private room. So it's going to cost $91,000 a year. He's not ready to give up his house yet. So he's got about $10,000 a year of fixed cost. So that means he's going to have to cash flow about $65,000 annually. So we take $91,000, the average nursing home care, add about $10,000 for his home expenses that he doesn't want to give up because he wants to pass it on, subtract out that $36,000 of Social Security because that's going to be going towards his care because he's going to receive it, like you said, into his bank account, pay it out, leaves about $65,000. Against $1.5 million of retirement assets, that's about 4.3%. And so he's going to have, if his retirement assets and Social Security both grew at the same rate that his long-term care cost grew, he's got about 23 years of distributions that he can take from his IRAs or retirement assets. I don't know many people that live in a retirement or a nursing home for 23 years. It's possible. He can still at that point then sell his home and he's still got assets to pay. Again, that's longer than the 2-year average, but this is just one hypothetical situation.
Well, and oftentimes what we'll see in situations like this is his living expenses might have been about that coming in. But instead of doing travel, instead of being engaged in various hobbies, well, now he's paying for that private room. And so his costs may not move around all that much. They're just shifting from one category over to another.
Right. So you want to take us through this second situation, Spencer?
Right. So this is a situation where we have Brian and Betty. They have Social Security benefits of $72,000, so a married couple. Home worth $300,000 again, that is paid off, and then retirement savings of about $750,000. So it doesn't have as much as Al there. And we see that Brian recently became wheelchair bound. So Betty doesn't need to, at this point, she's not planning to put him into a nursing home facility, but she does need some help. And she needs help, let's say 3.5 days a week. So their current monthly expenses are $8,000. So they're currently withdrawing $2,000 on a month-to-month basis. And that home health care aid costs about $150 a day, or about $2,200 on a month-to-month basis. So that brings the total annually from retirement accounts up to about $4,250 monthly, or about a little over $50,000 annually. So this is a situation that, as long as Brian's condition doesn't require additional care, they'd have a little over 14 years worth of distributions. They're taking out a little over 7% on average annually from that $750,000. So again, this is well within the realm of possibilities there. And then if Brian did pass away, we'd be in a situation where Betty would get a higher level of Social Security benefits, relative to just 50% for the two of them, and would have other options there. So oftentimes, as we put these numbers together, we can see that the circumstances are not nearly as dire as a client might anticipate coming in, because they've saved so well for these kinds of expenses.
Right. And we recognize that not everybody has saved like these hypothetical situations, but the clients that we interact with often do have savings set aside that can cover the cost of long-term care. So let's go into myth 2. Medicare will cover my long-term care cost.
Yeah, and that's just patently false. There's folks that think that they've been paying in to the system and that Medicare is going to cover that. There are some unique circumstances where, if you get out of a hospital, that a skilled nursing facility will help you for a few weeks. Beyond that, it's not going to. So the bulk of long-term care, if we think about whether that be assisted living or a nursing home unit, Medicare is not going to be the institution that's going to take care of you. It's not going to have any level of funding if you're in there for any period of time.
Right. So Medicare is not going to cover it. There's a possibility that Medicaid can cover it, though. The problem with that is that Medicaid is only intended to support the lowest income of families or people. And so really, there's quite a few requirements that we recognize that you have to fulfill to be eligible for Medicaid. And we're not going to go through all of them, but some of the highlights are you've got to have a monthly income of less than $2,700. You have to have less than $2,000 of countable assets if you're single, less than $4,000 for married couples. That includes retirement assets, liquid assets, bank savings. Doesn't include the value of your home. There's other requirements there, but really you don't have the assets there to cover the cost. And so we'll leave a link in the description below where you can look at some of the descriptions of, okay, what are those things that you have to do to qualify for Medicaid? But again, it's very limited of circumstances where that's going to be.
Right. So, and the dicey thing is here, if you get to that point and you have a spouse, then the spouse can't have that many assets either. So the thing that is particularly concerning is that, let's say we have a husband that's a few years older that needs these long-term care support resources. They may have to withdraw funds down to the point to be able to get the Medicaid help, where surviving spouse has very little left to live on. So we have to be really careful as we do that financial plan to make sure that we're accounting not just for a current need of long-term care, but also what may be a future need for a surviving spouse down the road.
All right, so let's look into our next myth, Spencer. My spouse or kids will take care of me. In an ideal world, this is the case. We want to believe and hope that family will take care of family. But as we know, long-term care needs, as certain diseases progress, it becomes harder and harder for the family to continue to take that burden on. And so, again, yes, in an ideal world, in many cases, this is the reality that a spouse will take care of their spouse. Kids may step in to take care of an aging parent. But at some point, we can't just bank on, I don't have to pay for long-term care because I've got family that's going to take care of me. So you can talk to your family about it. You can ask, okay, how much can you cover? What do you want to be able to take care of? But we really have to embrace the fact that if my kids live 1,000 miles away, it may not be feasible for them to take care of me.
Right, and we've really got three issues there. We've got proximity, as you mentioned. We've got the physical capacity, of the individual to care. And then we've got the cognitive element of the patient. So we talked about proximity. If we don't have anybody close to us, then that becomes almost a non-starter unless we're willing to move. Oftentimes we find that clients would prefer to stay close to their location that they've lived in for years and years, but be in an assisted living or in a nursing home closer there than maybe moving across the country if they needed to. So the proximity really has to be that conversation, and it's best to be able to surface that earlier rather than later, because you can then do research on the facilities that you might be able to move to and what it might actually look like for a life if you're moving, hours away. The second piece there is really the mobility piece, because you may have a spouse that's able to take care of you in all matters other than mobility. So you'll at least need someone to be able to come in several days a week to help with things like bathing and other elements. But it may be that just because you have mobility issues that you really can't stay at home beyond a certain point, because everything requires a level of strength, of movement, of coordination, which can be more expensive actually in home than it is in a facility. So that mobility element is the second thing. The third thing that we talk about is cognition, because we may have a loved one that's fully willing to take care, but they can't be on 24/7, 365. And so if you are at a point where, you may wander off, or you may be a potential harm to yourself or others, then those facilities are set up to be able to have around the clock coverage and care. So we've got those three areas really that go beyond even the best of intentions, the tightest of families, in being able to care for a loved one sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next myth is long-term care insurance is the only way to pay for care. Now, we kind of covered this a little bit by looking at those other situations before, but we want to really expose this a little bit more. Here's a couple stats on long-term care insurance that kind of help understand the marketplace. In 2002, there were around 750 long-term care policies sold. That number dropped to 75,000 in 2021. 60% of standalone long-term care insurance and combination life and long-term care insurance was sold in 2021 by Washington State's Washington Cares Fund. So even if you're trying to get long-term care insurance, if you're outside of the state of Washington, it's a whole lot harder. In 2000, there were about 125 insurers offering long-term care policies. Only 15 as of 2019. So we really want to say there's a lot less options for buying long-term care insurance. And when you look at care that was actually covered, only about 7.8% of long-term care needs was paid by long-term care insurance. And so, yes, if you have a policy, it does make sense in a lot of circumstances to maintain it. Because if you've got a policy, then you've got some coverage. If you are older and looking for long-term care, it's going to be really hard to find a policy that makes sense to purchase. Not saying it's not out there, but those costs have gotten exponentially more significant.
Well, and for our younger clients even, the purpose of insurance, if we think at it big picture, is you trade a known cost to be able to deal with this calamity that could come up. Well, with long-term care, we're not really addressing either side of it, because the known cost, oftentimes it becomes an unknown cost, because long-term care companies have traditionally gone to the state insurers and said, well, we're either going to go under, or you're going to have to let us increase our policy payments or fees by 45% or 50% or 80% or even 100%. So you may have gotten this policy and you said, okay, well, I'm willing to pay $1,200 a year for every year going forward, maybe with some minor cost of living adjustments, inflationary adjustments over time. But if suddenly 8 years down the road, that cost went to $2,400, and then another 3 years down the road, it went to $4,800. Wow, now you're really paying through the nose for this policy. And that has been the typical experience, because long-term care companies mispriced their policies 20 years ago, and we've seen fewer policies issued, as you mentioned. But even with our younger clients, we say, well, we have to really be prepared for a level of cost increase that is difficult to predict. So that, again, that first side of things, where that known cost that we would typically have for, say, a 20 or 30-year term life insurance policy, it is very, very different, with long-term care. The other side of things is, we've talked about it, but it's not as though we know how long a individual may need that long-term care. So if you buy a 5-year policy, you might only need 1.5 or 2 years, or you might need 12 years. Well, if you needed 12 years, maybe you run through all of the other assets that you have already. So there's, one actuary had told me at one point that his calculation was that it's only 1 out of 8 or 9 people that the long-term care insurance actually did what it was designed to do, which is, reduce the bill, maintain some assets that can be passed on, to loved ones thereafter.
All right, so this last myth, Spencer, we touched on it a little bit in the last video, but we want to come back to it because it's really important. I don't need a long-term care plan. It's a myth. You need to plan for long-term care needs. As we talked about in the last one, 70% of people turning age 65 will have some sort of a long-term care need. That doesn't mean that they're going to have to go to a nursing home. That doesn't mean that they're going to have to go to an assisted living facility. But there is going to be a need for long-term care. And so what we really want to address here is that make those decisions, make that plan while you are mentally and physically capable of making that plan for yourself. You don't want to get to a point where it's an emergency and you don't have a plan in place. You don't have instructions given to loved ones to say, here's what I want for my care, or here are the resources that I can use to pay for the care. And so really it's important to consider, what type of care do you want? What type of facility are you willing to move to? Maybe what are the ones that you have researched and visited and said, I really like this facility. If I need to move to a facility, let's consider this one. What cost can you incur? So what are some other questions that clients can work through if they want to create this plan?
Well, I think this is where we get to trade-offs. And there are so many of these. But if we think about the continuum of paths that a client could choose, they could have saved tremendously well for retirement, but they may say, I want to die with nothing in my account. I want to do all kinds of living and giving along the way. And if I need Medicaid by the end of life, I need Medicaid. Okay, that's one way that you can go. You may say, I want to accelerate the living and giving. I want to support every kind of different charity, every kind of different person that I love along the way. And I'm willing, to bear that risk that maybe I don't have enough and the state will need to help. That's one way you can go. Another way would be, we have clients on the other side of things that their deepest fear in life is that they end up not having enough and being pushed towards a facility that they've not chosen, but they don't have any other options. And so they save a tremendous amount, for that, having, extra layers of coverage all along the way. Well, that's also a trade-off because it means that they can do less living and giving oftentimes along the way. So it's really anywhere in between there. What most of our clients will do is say, okay, I want to have a plan in place. I want to be able to say, here are the key things that I want to make certain that I've got some funds in there, that my loved ones know that these are my preferences, and that I've got some people in place that can handle the financial and the healthcare decisions that may arise. But beyond that, they may not plan to have funds in place for a 15-year stay. They may just have plans in place that would take care of the vast bulk of the situations, but not also keep them from doing a lot of the things that they want to do in retirement. So it's really about those trade-offs. We think about how much needs to be saved, what people need to be in place, what structures need to be in place to give them the best opportunity for success, not just in this particular issue, because a financial plan is not just a financial plan for long-term care. It's a financial plan for saying, how do I want and desire life to unfold and make those decisions that are critical in a way that aligns my wealth with my values.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this video about long-term care myths. This isn't comprehensive, and we'd always say, talk to your financial advisor, talk to your tax professional about some of the ramifications of your particular circumstance. Clients, if you want to bring your plan to us or have questions about how to build a long-term care plan, we'd love to talk to you about it. Stay tuned, and we will have another video about long-term care coming soon. If you like these financial planning videos, please share with a friend, and if you have questions, Go to our website at SiriusRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SiriusRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.